Legends of Runeterra has officially launched, and with it, the Rising Tides set has also been released. The meta changed drastically since the open beta, thanks to the repeated balance patches coupled with a new set release. Legends of Runeterra has been a blast for card game enthusiasts around the world who have been thoroughly enjoying the game's complexity and accessibility. Welcome to the first ever Tempo Storm Legends of Runeterra meta snapshot breakdown. In this series, we'll be taking a look at the top performing decks across the Runeterra ladder. Be sure to check out the rest of the meta report over at tempostorm.com for a more in-depth analysis of each deck on the tier list. Our tier list is based on the opinion and experiences of high-level Masters players who offer the most competitive understanding of the Runeterra meta. Before we begin, please be sure to subscribe to our channel and to turn notifications on to be kept up to date with all of our strategy game content. While our channel will continue to provide Hearthstone meta updates, there will be a lot more Runeterra videos to come in the future. Now that that's out of the way, let's jump right into Tier 1. Leading off Tier 1 is Grizzled. This archetype is a new take on Bannerman decks that makes use of the powerful units Demacia has to fight for board aggressively. Grizzled has a suite of flexible cards and plays out like the majority of mid-range decks we know and love in card games by aiming to curve out well. Grizzled is a very well-rounded deck, but its best matchup is against Scouts, one of the fastest archetypes in the game. In this matchup, Grizzled is favored at 70%, making it difficult to lose when piloted well. Typically, you have all of the tools to take a commanding board lead and never let the Scouts player get it back. As for bad matchups, this archetype can find itself struggling against Heimer due simply to how well the deck's arsenal of spells line up into Grizzled. They're able to stave off pressure with efficient removal and can even generate large swing turns thanks to its champion choices. On top of that, the elusive units can prove to be problematic for Grizzled to interact with. That's not to say this matchup is horrible though, as it still is nearly 50-50. Next up in Tier 1 is the notorious Champless Burn. This archetype has been the talk of the town lately, and players might even be surprised to find it not listed as the best deck in the game. Due to the deck being extremely meta-warping, players are actively doing anything in their power to beat it where possible. This puts Champless Burn in a slightly worse position for laddering than Grizzled in Tier 1. Make no mistake though, this archetype is extremely powerful and will likely be nerfed slightly in the coming weeks. Champless Burn plays out like any traditional aggro deck and aims to kill the opponent as fast as possible. Curve out with minions early, then use spells to kill your opponent. This is the deck's general game plan, and as such, it can feel very uninteractive to play against at times. In a game like LOR where players only have 20 health each, burn decks can get out of hand really quickly. Champless Burn has a really good matchup against Heimer right now, as the deck doesn't have that much healing. Even though it can clear the board repeatedly, it will typically succumb to the aggression of the burn deck. Champless Burn is not unbeatable though, and has a pretty rough matchup against Corina. This archetype is a mid-tier 2 control archetype that was practically built to beat burn. It has the early tools to fight for the board, the removal spells to stop the pressure, and even healing to stall out the game, making it a pretty bad time for the aggro player. Following in the shadow of Champless Burn is the previously mentioned Heimer. This archetype came to prevalence mostly due to its good matchup against Grizzled, and as such will likely be relevant as long as Grizzled sees play. Vi is such a powerful champion that's making waves and finding her way into several different archetypes. The fact that she is in more than one Tier 1 deck should speak for itself, making her arguably one of the more valuable early champion crafts for players starting out. By running Ionia, Heimer has access to some of the best spells in the game, which not only complement Heimer, but can also make the opponent's game plan much more difficult to achieve. Aside from Grizzled, this archetype also has a really good matchup against some of the slower decks on the ladder, such as sea monsters. Heimer also allows you to generate constant pressure, and with your arsenal of spells, you can typically protect him from removal, assuming you save enough mana each turn to make defensive plays. On top of this, your few elusive minions can also be pesky threats that can eat up some of their removal options, giving you time to get Heimerdinger online. When it comes to bad matchups, Champless Burn is really bad for this deck. We know we mentioned it before, but we really need to drive home just how bad this matchup truly is. Sitting at 35%, it can feel nearly unwinnable at times unless you've drawn the perfect hand. If you find yourself running into a lot of burn, then Heimer might not be the best choice for you. The last deck we'll be looking at in Tier 1 today is Lux Karma. This archetype preys on Tier 2 decks and has an insane win rate against the majority of them. While it does struggle against burn, it's on a fairly even playing field against the rest of the Tier 1 archetypes. Lux and Karma is a really powerful champion combination, and together can make for some very interesting interesting game states once both are leveled up. On top of that, thanks to having access to Demacia, this archetype also can make use of both Loyal Badger Bear and Grizzled Ranger, giving them access to some of the best units in the game. Lux Karma has a fantastic matchup against Corina, ranking in at 80%. This matchup is so difficult to lose and requires not only you to draw poorly, but also for your opponent to draw insanely well. As for bad matchups, everyone's favorite burn deck can be difficult for Lux Karma to deal with, as they can just out-pressure you before you have time to assemble your own game plan. In order to gain a better understanding of the decks within the second tier, we're going to be taking a look at the top 3. If you're interested in learning more about the rest of the decks in this tier, check out the rest of the meta report over on TempoStorm.com. Now let's take a look at the deck that narrowly missed its debut into Tier 1. Leading off Tier 2 is the new archetype, Kleptomancy. This archetype makes use of cards with the ability to draw your opponent's cards combined with Black Market Merchant to make them cost 1 less. This allows you to effectively play your opponent's deck for cheaper than they can. This archetype makes use of the plunder effects as well as the powerful champions, Twisted Fate, and Gangplank in order to create large swing turns. While this deck might not be in Tier 1 currently, it wouldn't be that big of a surprise to see it make the jump in the coming days. The archetype has been gaining popularity recently, and given the right meta shift, it will likely find its way into Tier 1. Klepto's best matchup comes from Corina, as the deck can struggle to deal with the larger threats, and if Corina or Ledros are stolen, it can be game-ending. As for bad matchups, Klepto can struggle with Sea Monster, as their threats can be hard to interact with, and even when stolen, don't really synergize with Klepto's game plan. Next up in Tier 2 is Ezreal Karma. This archetype was really popular in previous metas and has been seen as the go-to combo deck for quite some time. While it may have fallen from grace slightly, the archetype is still performing well and has been seeing success on the ladder and in tournament play. This deck has a favorable matchup against Sea Monster, as they can typically level up their Ezreal relatively easily and then can kill their opponent in 1 turn with either both Ezreal and Karma, or more often than not, just Ezreal. As for bad matchups, Ezreal Karma can find itself struggling against burn due to the lack of reliable healing the deck has. The last deck we'll be taking a look at in Tier 2 is Corina. This build started to gain popularity towards the end of the open beta and has been seeing more and more play lately. Corina has access to an arsenal of removal tools to stave off the early pressure, then can close out the game by typically spamming Commander Ledros or by using Corina to burst the opponent down. Corina can be a really rewarding deck to play, so we here at TempoStorm suggest giving it a try. While the deck only finds itself in Tier 2, it can be one of the best choices for targeting burn, leaving it to be a solid choice for ladder. When it comes to bad matchups, Corina can find itself struggling massively with Lux Karma, with this matchup being nearly unwinnable. As we mentioned before, this matchup takes a lot of luck to win and can feel extremely hopeless for the Corina player. Before we wrap up this meta report, we wanted to give you a deck that you could use to gain an edge when queuing on ladder. Typically, gaining an edge would require you to queue a deck that has a favorable matchup against the majority of the top tiers. This time around, our experts at TempoStorm suggest that you queue Sea Monsters to gain a significant edge on ladder. While this deck finds itself in Tier 2 currently, when teched properly, it can find itself in a good position against both Champless Burn and Demacia, making it a solid choice for ladder. If you find yourself running into a lot of the top 2 decks in the meta, then we heavily suggest you go deep and take a chance with Sea Monsters. In conclusion, the Legends of Runeterra meta is still shifting daily, and new decks and builds continue to pop up as a response. Only time will tell if Grizzled or Burn will fall from grace, but for the time being, they will be the driving forces of the meta. How are you enjoying the Rising Tides expansion? Has Burn tilted you off the face of the earth, or are you looking past it and exploring all the new archetypes? Let us know in the comments below. As always, we truly appreciate your support, and it'd mean a lot to us if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel to be kept up to date with all of our strategy game content. You'll be seeing more Legends of Runeterra on this channel in the future, so keep an eye out. We'll see you next time.